I've been asked to speak to you again, this time about Palm Sunday. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the symbolism that's within it, why I feel it's an incredibly important holiday in the Christian calendar, and why it's something which we should continue to remember in our yearly devotion through the calendar. There's a lot of symbolism within Palm Sunday. Firstly, and most obviously, the palm branches. In the ancient world, palm branches were a symbol of victory. They were waved around when a king was taking over, a king was returning. There was some great excitement. There was victory. There were elements of it that could be quite military. And so to combat that, Christ rode in on a donkey. If he rode in on a horse, it would be much more, in a way, impressive. It would have been grand. There would be a great display if he rode in on a horse with perhaps his disciples similarly on horses riding in. But instead they walked on foot and he rode a donkey. He did this because it is really a symbol of peace. He is, of course, the Prince of Peace. And him riding in on the donkey shows that peace. He also fulfills, in doing this, prophecies that we find in the Old Testament. Prophecies which say that the king will be riding in on a donkey, that these palm branches will be raised, robes will be laid on the ground, that when the Messiah comes, the king, that the people of the world will have a new king which will be acting with God. But they knew this. It's a very important reason why they entered the gate where they did, why they entered Jerusalem where they did. In chapter 11 of St. Mark's Gospel, it says that they came nigh to Jerusalem unto Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. If you know the layout of the geography of Jerusalem, you know that's on the east side of the city. And that's important. It's important because in the prophet Ezekiel, which I'll turn to now, the prophet Ezekiel's book in the 11th chapter, the 10th chapter, at the 19th verse, it says, "The cherubims lifted up their wings and mounted up from the earth in my sight. When they went out, the wheels also were beside them, and everyone stood at the door of the east gate of the Lord's house. The glory of God of Israel was over them above." He goes on to explain how, in his vision, the people of Israel had sinned so much and caused so much distress in Jerusalem that the glory cloud of God himself left the Holy of Holies, left the temple, went up upon the wings of cherubim and went out via the east gate. Later on in the 43rd chapter onwards, it speaks about the return. He says that this glory cloud of God's presence will return and descend upon the people of Jerusalem, and it will enter in from the east gate. And so in this Palm Sunday reading, we see not only this is the king returning, but this is the glory of God himself going into the city on the back of a donkey. And this is why it's victory. This is excitement, because this isn't simply a king. This isn't simply a new David. There already has been a David. This is God himself coming in on this donkey. And in Ezekiel, we can see that great excitement. And this is why they waved around palm branches. This is why they laid their robes down on the ground. This is why the first place they led him to wasn't one of the governmental buildings, but was the temple, where he ended up overthrowing, of course, all of the cellars and cleansed the temple. This is God himself riding in. But how does this relate to us? Well, this Palm Sunday is not a time simply to look at a historical event where Christ showed his divinity, though that is important. It is also a time where we must remember that all of these things in the Old Testament and in the New Testament are reflections of what is to come still for us. Of course, through Revelation we can see this. It says in chapter 7, the Revelation of St. John the Divine, and the 9th verse. After this, I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, and palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. You see, this isn't simply a time to remember Palm Sunday as a historical event, because this is an event that we must be preparing for as well. We learn from the Old Testament that this will happen. We see in the New Testament that it did happen, and we see in Revelation that this will happen again. And with all we know now, we know how to prepare for it. For he is the King who will come, but who will come in peace. For he will take over, and he will rule us again in fullness, but in love and charity. And we must spend our time now, especially on Palm Sunday, preparing our hearts and knowing that his return will happen. Amen.